Welcome to the Burn Your Mortgage Podcast, a Canadian real estate podcast that shows you how to pay off your mortgage sooner and live well while doing it. Now, here's your host, Sean Cooper.
Welcome to the Burn Your Mortgage Podcast. I'm Sean Cooper, and it's great to be back for another episode. On today's show, I'll be talking to Barry Choi. Barry Choi is an award-winning Toronto-based personal finance and travel expert. As a completely self-taught, do-it-yourself investor with no formal training, Barry makes money easy to understand for all Canadians. He combines his knowledge of finance with his passion for travel and encourages people to see the world. Barry's specialties include personal finance, trip planning, millennial money, Gen Z money, credit cards, and trending destinations. In my interview with Barry, we discuss moving up in the real estate market from a two-bedroom condo to a three-bedroom townhouse, becoming a landlord, making the most of your credit cards on home renovations, and getting a mortgage as self-employed. Without further ado, here's my interview with Barry Choi. Hi, Barry. How are you doing today?
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you. I wish I had you on a lot sooner, but I'd realized that I hadn't had you on a guest on the podcast here, so I guess better late than never.
Yeah, it's weird because I've known you for, I feel like at least a decade now.
Yeah, I should have had you on a lot sooner, but I guess I can save the best for last.
Well, hopefully I'm not your last guest. Hopefully you have many more after this.
Yes, hopefully. I'll try not to say anything to get canceled. Okay, great. Well, I realize you've been busy for the last while here. So yeah, maybe you can tell us, the listeners, about what you've been up to from a real estate standpoint. I understand that you were living in a two-bedroom condo and you moved up to a three-bedroom townhouse. So yeah, maybe you could tell us a bit about your journey and how all of that went, and just feel free to share the experience with the listeners, because some people are first-time home buyers and they've never actually gone through the whole moving up in the market or even like buying and selling at the same time. So yes, if you could share your experience, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that would be great.
You know, like everyone else, I feel like when you live in any place, you eventually want more room. I was in a two-bedroom condo, as mentioned, with my wife and my daughter. And honestly, for the three of us, it wasn't bad, right? We had 900 square feet, lots of amenities, walking distance to the subway, close to the highway. My daughter's school was a 5-minute walk away. So it was comfortable, right? And we had built everything in the home where it was kind of specific for our needs. And what I mean by that is we had built custom closets. We renovated our kitchen for our needs. So it was a great place to live, but eventually you just want more space, right? It would be nice to have additional room, to have a basement or whatever. So we had casually been looking for the last 3 years. The biggest issue for us personally was the fact that we did not want to leave our area, specifically for the reasons I just mentioned. It was too convenient. We could have moved much earlier had we moved outside of Toronto. Just so people know, I live in Toronto, the Yonge and Sheppard area, which is very popular. Had I moved up to Vaughan, it wouldn't have been a problem to get home pretty quickly. But there's a lot of competition in my area. So we lost on quite a few homes, probably 10 homes that we lost out on.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's not compared to a lot of other people, right? Like, I'm sure you've spoken to people, people who are in similar situations. And it kind of worked out for us because in this recent interest rate hikes in the last 6 months, people were really worried. You really started to see it, I would say, last fall, where people weren't really bidding as much. But at the same time, sellers weren't really lowering their prices very much either. So there was not a ton of market activity. So when this home came up, having lost out on a few others, my wife just really wanted to buy the home. So even though I felt like we were probably paying more than we should have, and we could have tried to negotiate a little bit harder, the seller could have just said, you know what, we're going to wait for someone else to give us a better offer, because that's what people had done. So in the end, we just agreed to the price with not much of a pushback, and we got the home. But part of the reason we feel like we got is because they had a quick close. It was only 30 days and we met all of their conditions, and they actually agreed to meet our conditions, which was financing and home inspection. So it was a good compromise.
That's great. And yeah, I guess it all depends on what did you try to figure out why they were selling their property? I find it's always helpful to know the motivation of the seller. Like some people are just listing it to try to see how much they get. Other times they have bought a property already and they need to sell their property. Were you able to find out about what their motivation what there was for selling?
Well, a good agent never tells, right? Like they'll never admit why. But to us, it seemed rather obvious that if they had a 30 close, they either already bought property or they moved countries. But just after touring the house, we just kind of assumed that their kids had already moved out. Their kids are grown up, so they're empty nesters. They're probably looking to downsize. So our kind of read was like they are probably not in a huge rush to sell, even though there is a 30-day close. So we didn't feel like we had much power. But again, they did agree to a home inspection. So we did have a little bit of power, if you want to call it that.
No, that makes sense. And what made you decide to upgrade to a townhouse instead of like a semi-detached or detached house? I mean, obviously there's budget is as a reason there, but I'm just curious, like, what did you like about the townhouse? Was it kind of the best of both worlds? It's kind of like you still get the condo living, but you get more of a freedom, like being a homeowner, like more space and such. I don't know if you have a yard or anything like that. But yeah, what made you like the townhouse rather than like going up to a house?
So it was kind of like where we live. If you want to move up from a condo, you either went to a 3-bedroom condo or you went to a townhouse. Because just in my immediate area, there's no semi detached. There really isn't any semi detached homes in this area whatsoever. And by this area, I mean my daughter's like school zone. And if we went to detached, the prices jump up to about 2 million. And the reason for that is a lot of these homes or this area is so popular that construction companies will just buy it at any price, knock it down, build a big house, and then sell it for $3.5 to $4 million. That's constantly seeing it. So any detached house gets knocked down now. Like no detached house in the area that gets sold ends up to someone who wants to live in it. That was an unfortunate reality. So then the compromise was a townhouse. And I'm in a condo townhouse, so I have no backyard. I have a shared garage. So I do have some condo amenities. And by that, it's really just landscaping. There's no pool, there's no security, there's no concierge. But the overall living is quite nice because I don't need to worry about mowing grass and things like that. But it's also a stacked townhouse. So from my basement to the top floor, 3 stories, it's 46 steps. The first week I moved in, I was so out of breath. It was pathetic, Sean. The amount of stairs I had to keep climbing. Fortunately, I've adapted to it. So maybe getting this townhouse is good for my health.
Yeah, who needs the gym when you have all these stairs
Oh,
to
I
climb?
definitely still need the gym. Just
Well, that's good for cardio. You could just do the weightlifting at the gym.
that's true.
Well, yeah, that sounds great. And yeah, I definitely hear you in my areas as well. Like the starter homes, like the wartime bungalows, they're knocking them over and adding these McMansions. And my
Mhm.
concern is that, like, how is the next generation ever going to get a starter home when they're disappearing? Like, really, your only choice in a lot of cases is condos or townhouse or something like that. It's really hard to make the jump to attach home when you're looking at 2 million to start. So I totally hear you there, Barry. So yeah, like my understanding as well is that you didn't do, I guess, the typical thing where you sold your first property and used the equity from that to buy the next property. You actually held on to your 2-bedroom condo and decided
Mhm.
to become a landlord. So I'm just curious your thought process on that and what made you to decide to go in that route there. And maybe you could just talk a bit about the financing and how you did that. Like if you refinance that property and pull some equity out of that. I'd just be curious to hear why you decided to go in that direction and how the whole financing went.
Well, the wife made the decision about becoming landlords. I actually wanted to sell the condo. It's funny because had we sold the condo and based on how much we had saved, maybe that 2 million detached house was a possibility. That's just me wishful thinking. I'm sure there'll be other variables in place. But just to give some context, we had bought our first home 8 years ago, roughly, and we paid it off in about 2.5 years. And that was kind of unintentional slash intentional. Yeah, we had put in some extra effort to increase our mortgage payments and things like that. But it's just, I used to work for an employer and there was an employee stock plan. And the stock plan, as long as I maxed it out every single year, was giving me like thirty to $40,000 extra. Mind you, 25, 50% of that was my money put in from my salary, but it was a good return. And then over the years, I became self-employed. So I actually had another income stream. So that greatly increased my total compensation overall. So I was able to save a lot of money since I had no mortgage. And at the time, my daughter was just born. The expenses weren't as crazy as we thought they would be, besides daycare. And then, it's also some sheer luck in the sense that when the pandemic started, you may recall, stock market crashed quite a bit.
Yes.
I continued to just invest like I normally did. I didn't make any changes to my investment strategy. Still maxed out my TFSA, had some money in a taxable income account. And, markets quickly rebounded. And haven't looked recently, but they're up considerably since that market crash. So my investments just went up. But part of this, like, let's be like, I wasn't necessarily planning on moving. So that's why I had my investments invested in the stock market. When I was planning to buy the first place, I just had it in a high interest savings account. Right. So it's kind of like luck. Like I said, it was like, oh, this money was growing. I had also quit my full time job. And because at the time when I quit, interest rates were really low and I decided to get my pension paid out. So people may not realize that, but with pension adjustments and when you get your payout for liras, when interest rates are low, the actual amount of money you get is quite high. So again, all of a sudden I came into this money. Again, it wasn't like a huge amount, but it also wasn't insignificant. It was probably another $40,000 to $50,000. So just over the years, we were just able to accumulate more money from savings and working. And obviously, we're pushing in our early 40s now, just your regular career growth, you just naturally make more money. So to finance the home, that was essentially it. Just a lot of saving. And straight up, I'll admit it, my parents gave me more money. I wasn't expecting it. They gave us $100,000. I'll openly say that so people don't question my intentions, but that was unexpected. I was not depending on that. And then when I told my parents we were getting close to buying a home, then they're like, "Oh, we'll give you $100,000." And me and my wife were obviously very grateful for that.
Wow, that's great. Thanks for sharing all those details with listeners. It certainly helps. So, yeah, like I guess happy wife, happy life. So that's what you decided to do in terms of being a landlord there. So, I'm just curious, can you talk a bit about like, do you have a tenant right now in the condo? And can you talk a bit about the process of renting out the property? How did you, again, I don't know what stage you're at and whether you have a tenant in it, but I mean, did you hire a realtor to help you with that, or did you just use Facebook Marketplace? Just be curious to hear about the whole rental like experience, depending on where you're at.
So our tenant's scheduled to move in like the next few days. She hasn't given us the exact date because she doesn't quite know yet. But we decided to go through our realtor, the same realtor that we bought our house with, because for us, it just made more sense. These days, with so many scams online, as far as rental scams are concerned, I felt like using a realtor, a professional, just gave us an extra layer of security. And sometimes, to be honest with you, I don't know why realtors do it. The amount of work they have to do for the amount they get back because they have to give half of it to their brokerage. It's so much work for so little pay. It's such an underrated thing. Obviously, I had to give up a month's rent. But to me, that was a good value because we just had to screen all the tenants. We came up with the right strategy. We had photos done. And having that right strategy really mattered because essentially pricing the unit right. And because we knew we had a good property, we had a lot of applicants who were very interested in our property. So we chose someone that not only fit into what we were looking for, obviously someone who had a stable income, but we also chose a family that we felt that they would really enjoy the neighborhood and they would really get a lot in being part of this community. I know it sounds weird, but we just wanted to make sure we weren't looking for the person who was willing to pay us the most.
Great advice, Barry, because yeah, like I echo what you said. Recently, I ended up moving upstairs in my property and renting out the basement. So I ended up using a realtor to rent out the basement just for like what you said. There's just, you got to be careful when you're dealing with people online. There's so many scams out there. But yes, the realtor definitely earns their pay with all the work that they do. And yeah, like, in terms of pricing strategy with the rental unit, I echo what you're saying there. Like, you don't want to be greedy and ask for top dollar in terms of rental income because you really only get the most desperate people, and that actually causes the pool of the tenants to dwindle considerably. So yeah, I mean, you don't want to list it for dirt cheap or anything like that. You want to kind of come up with a fair offer, like a fair rental amount, so that you attract like a decent
And that was
size of
actually pretty easy. Right? It was like, because I'm in a huge area full of condos, it was really easy to see what the average price was. And then while using a realtor, it was showing us how long these rentals had been on the market. So just by pricing the unit $100 less, we had so much demand. It obviously worked in our favor.
Yeah, and $100 may seem like a lot, but you claim income tax on it. It's a really insignificant amount. And yeah, having a good tenant and avoiding the landlord tenant board, like that's definitely something that you want to do. So I'm totally on the same page as you there. So moving on here, I understand that you've been undergoing some renovations on the new property, your
Mhm.
new townhouse here. So yeah, I'd love to hear about the exciting renovations to, I guess, make the space your own, as well as, since you're the credit card and travel expert, I guess more on the credit card side, I'd be curious to hear how you utilize your credit cards from a home renovation standpoint. I mean, you're always talking about it from a travel standpoint, but my understanding is that you use them to your benefit for the renovation. So yeah, I'd be curious to your
Yeah.
perspective on that.
So we'll just talk about the renovation really quickly. Essentially, the home is 25 years old and it had a lot of things that were popular from 25 years ago, like a fireplace, built-in TV monitor area. It just didn't make much sense for us, so we opened it up. And then the previous tenant, for whatever, or sorry, previous owner, for whatever reason, had carpets on the stairs and upstairs floor, so we just had those redone. But overall, what it really comes down to as far as maximizing credit cards is we just had a lot of expenses coming up with renovations. So although the contractor didn't necessarily take credit cards directly, they said that, like, if you're going to buy your own appliances or the hardwood or whatever, they would obviously just reduce that price from our invoice and they get discount price. So when I started pricing out appliances, I quickly realized, like, okay, it's going to cost us about $6,000 for new appliances. So I immediately just looked for a credit card that would give me a big welcome bonus for spending about $5,000. Right? It was just that simple.
Wow, that's pretty
So at the
smart.
time, the American Express Business Gold Card gave me 75,000 points when I spent $5,000. It has an annual fee of $199. But when you factor in the welcome bonus plus the amount I had to spend, that's $800 I was getting in points. So I was ahead by $600. If I transferred that to Aeroplan, I could double the value. So I was getting a value of up to $1,200 in points just by signing up for that card. But obviously, there's other expenses too. We had to get new window coverings, and the quote we got was about $3,500. And they were like, "Oh, but we take credit cards." So again, I was like, "Oh, $3,500 is pretty close to $5,000. I should get another credit card." But I didn't want that immediate credit hit again. So what I did is I referred my wife to the same card because American Express has a referral program. I got 15,000 points. She got the 75,000 points from welcome bonus. So just from this home renovation, and I wasn't even trying that hard because I already have a lot of credit cards. I got like another 250,000 points overall. So there's a lot of good value in it. Again, it really just comes down to seeing what credit card has a good welcome offer that meets the minimum spending requirement that you're going to spend anyways.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Definitely thanks for sharing that. And not everyone is credit card savvy as you. So definitely all the listeners need to visit Barry's blog, because yeah, it's not easy to kind of figure some of this out yourself. Barry breaks it down great on his website there. So be sure to check out his website, and we'll include links in the show notes as well. So yeah, thanks for sharing your experience there. And yeah, the last thing I want to finish off with is if you could just talk a bit about your experience getting a mortgage as being self-employed. Like, I'm not sure if the first time, like, I'm not sure if you tried switching lenders when you were self-employed, or this was really the first time that you had like applied for a mortgage being self-employed. But yeah, I'm sure there was a bit of like, you're more financially savvy than the average person. I'm sure you had an idea about some of this stuff, like 2-year averages and stuff like that when you're self-employed. But you really don't understand it until you actually go through it yourself. So yeah, I'd love to hear like how the whole process went, and things that you learned that you wish you had have known before you had gone through the process that would have made it easier. Because yeah, when we were talking offline, like the challenge of being self-employed is you want to it seems like the mortgage broker, whoever you're working with, and the accountant are working in separate directions. Like the accountant wants to minimize taxes, but the mortgage broker wants to make sure that you have enough income so that you can
Yep,
qualify for the
yep.
mortgage. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that balancing act and anything else that you learned along the way that would be helpful for the listeners that are in a self-employed situation or thinking about going that way. Because that's the trend these days. More and more people are going self-employed, freelancing, stuff like that there. So yeah, anything you could share would be great.
Yeah, so like I said, we started the search about 3 years ago. And at the time, I had contacted the same mortgage broker I had used when we bought our first home. And he made it sound like it was really difficult to get a mortgage as being self-employed. It would require a lot more paperwork. We had to prove all these things. And that was fine. I knew it was going to be the case, so it wasn't a big deal. But when we actually got the home, like the offer was accepted, I decided to reach out to a different broker just because I was like, you know what? I don't feel like this is necessarily right. I'm going to check with someone else. And weirdly enough, because it was such a quick closing, I decided to reach out to my regular bank, one of their mortgage specialists. And he called me back within like 15 minutes of me sending an email. And I explained to him my situation. And he straight up said, it's like, listen, you being self employed actually doesn't make a difference because all you need to do is show us your notice of assessments for the last 2 years, your T4, and your business income. So just show us your business bank account or whatever, and you're good. And I provided it with them right away. He's like, yeah, just looking at this, I don't see there being an issue unless there's something else that comes up in case I had a case of identity fraud on my account like that. So as weird as it sounds, getting a mortgage as someone who is self-employed ended up being super easy. I just had to submit more paperwork than my wife. And what's interesting is like I like how you brought up it's like, oh, you want to minimize taxes from an accounting standpoint. That's where you minimize how much you're paid. The broker said straight up, as long as you show the business income in your business account, you're good. And what's really interesting is working with a good broker can be night and day. Because when I initially mentioned what I was thinking about doing and having a finance background, I thought it was the best thing. He straight up said to me, he's like, no, no, no. It's like, what you want to do is like, you should actually get a HELOC on your condo and use that to pay off or to help fund your new home because you're avoiding a certain step. It would actually lower the interest rate you're paying. So he gave some really solid advice. And this is what it really comes back down to working with professionals that know what they're doing that can really explain what your best option is overall.
Very well said. I couldn't have said it better myself there. And yeah, thanks for sharing your experience because yeah, being self-employed and applying for a mortgage, yeah, there's a bit of a misconception out there. It is true that you need more paperwork, but it's not as painful as some people say. So yeah, it's definitely a good idea. Don't just make an offer on a house and hand over your tax returns and hope you qualify. Very important to get
I did have that
pre-approved and
financing condition. That's why I did
yeah,
it.
that's very smart. But yeah, definitely a good idea to get pre-approved in advance because I would imagine you didn't just go out and go home shopping. You kind of crunch the numbers with like a
Yeah, I
mortgage
knew offline
professional.
what we could realistically speaking afford. But oh, one thing we didn't touch on, I want to make sure we touch on it because I know we're going to wrap up soon, is originally like 10 years ago when we first met, like I was like, house prices can't go up forever. And I still don't think they'll go up forever. But my mindset now is the fact that like I said, I feel like I overpaid for this home, but it came to a point where it's like, I'm just gonna buy what I can afford and just get on with my life. So even though I felt like I paid more, I know I can afford the payments. If interest rates go up, I'm not going to be affected. This isn't going to affect me long term. So I'm content with that decision.
That's great to hear because, yeah, you just read all these headlines in the media about housing crash and all this stuff, and housing's overvalued and all that, and makes people kind of give pause. But at the end of the day, you just kind of need to get on with your life. Like, if you don't end up actually like making a decision, you can kind of just sit on the sidelines and not do anything. Like, when I bought my house, I was like read all these headlines about real estate prices crashing and stuff like that. But if I hadn't have bought my house, the house that I'm in today, like I bought it for 425, it's actually worth like $1 million. Like if I hadn't have bought anything back then, I would have kicking myself because I wouldn't even be able to get into the market these days, or
Yep.
maybe gotten like my only option would be like some shoebox condo on the outskirts of the greater Toronto area. So yeah, at the end of the day, you just kind of need to make a decision. Don't suffer from paralysis by analysis, however they like to say it there. Like, it's good to have data, but at the end of the day, you just kind of need to make a decision, because if you don't make a decision, like, your life's kind of constantly on pause. So, I mean, yeah, like, it's great that you're able to find your property that was well suited for you, but at the end of the day, you kind of just need to finally make a decision and pull the trigger eventually.
And that's exactly it. And in the end, like I said, we can afford this place. We're happy and we're just ready to move on with our lives.
That sounds great. Well, it was a pleasure having you on the podcast today, Barry. Again, apologies that it took so long. I meant to have you on sooner. And yeah, thanks so much for sharing your most recent experience, and be sure to check in with you again in the future. I'd love to hear how everything's going with as being a landlord. And yeah, I'd love to hear how townhouse living is going as well. So yeah, thanks again for your time today.
Thanks for having me anytime.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Burn Your Mortgage podcast. Besides being a podcast host, I'm also an independent mortgage broker. If you or anyone you know, family, friends, coworkers, or neighbors could ever use any unbiased mortgage advice or a second opinion, feel free to reach out. Email me at Sean, that's SEAN, at burnyourmortgage.ca, or call or text me at 647-867-3711 for a free mortgage consultation. Also, be sure to head on over to www.burnyourmortgage.ca and sign up for my free weekly newsletter. As a small token of my appreciation, you'll be able to download my ultimate mortgage checklist on choosing the perfect mortgage. I look forward to hearing from you and helping you with all your mortgage needs. Once again, thanks for listening.
You've been listening to the Burn Your Mortgage podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes and leave a rating. Until next time, happy mortgage burning.